ladies. I hope everybody got pizza, and there is a gluten-free pizza back there in the corner. I've kind of protected it, so if anybody is gluten-free, go for that, and help yourself to salad and water. This is going to be an eating, listening event, so my name's Kathy Snyder, and I'm a participant of the Women's On going on Thursday mornings. And I heard about Linda Meyers from a friend of mine who does the other moms group, and she had just glowing things to say about Linda. And I've always wanted to hear her talk about creating a legacy, because I don't know about you, but whenever I leave a funeral, and I hear an amazing, inspiring eulogy, I think, what in the world is anybody gonna say about me? And so that doesn't really concern me that much, but what I did think is, I'm gonna have to write my own. I'll probably add a few things to it, and then I'll have whoever delivers it say it, just read it, fabrications and all. So anyways, I feel a little bit like it's kind of countercultural to our Christian faith to talk about ourselves and what we do. We're taught to be humble, and we're taught to not brag about what we do and things, but in reality, how are our kids ever going to model what we do unless we share it with them? So the other thing I feel about leaving a legacy is it's something we're called to do. I don't think it's really should be a choice of ours as much as it's part of our Christian faith. It's part of the Great Commission and evangelizing, and just as important to evangelize to our family and our kids and grandkids. So luckily we have Linda Meyers here, who's agreed to share her lessons. Linda is a resident of Cincinnati, born and raised in the West Side. She's a member of the Whitewater Crossing Christian Church, and she has 2 children and 5 grandchildren, married for 43 years. You don't look like you could be 43 years married. She worked as an RN at a university hospital, and then quit to start a second career in data management for 20 years. She's now retired and spending time volunteering at church and in the community. So welcome, Linda Meyers.
I'm going to sit down if that's okay. Maybe I won't want that. Well, simply stated, a legacy is something that is left behind, passed down to descendants or heirs, and it originally was thought of as something tangible, like personal possessions, your wealth, things like that. But over time, it has come to be more than that. It is really anything that you pass on or leave behind to others. It's actually how you and I will be remembered. And I like that better because it puts the emphasis on values rather than values. In ancient Greece, when it was time for the Olympic Games, athletes from around the country would gather, and they would be passed a torch with a special flame. And one athlete would take that torch, and they would run as hard and as fast as they could, their leg of the race, then pass the torch on to the next runner, who then would pass it on, and so on, until the torch with the special flame arrived at the altar at Mount Olympia. It was a very sacred thing to them, and it symbolized, they said, the light of spirit, knowledge, and life that gets passed down from one generation to another. They were the keepers of the flame, the passers of the torch. They knew the importance of passing on their values to the next generation who would carry them on. And in a sense, from Genesis on, God passes his dreams of community to a human by the name of Abraham, who would then pass that torch on to someone else. And that's why it was so important for Abraham and Sarah to have a child, someone for Abraham to pass his torch to. Abraham to Isaac, to Jacob, to Joseph, and on and on. And it doesn't just happen between parents and children. Moses passed the torch on to Joshua. Eli passed the torch on to Samuel. Jesus one day passed the torch to the 12. And Paul passed the torch to Timothy. And I point that out because there's a sense in which God's dream, his work, is at risk in every generation. And the question is always, will somebody guard the flame? Will somebody pass the torch? And it doesn't happen automatically. And when you think about it, everyone in this room is here because at least one person passed the torch to you. It may have been your parents. It may have been teachers. Maybe there was somebody at a church somewhere, but someone saw potential and gifts in you. Someone nurtured your faith. Someone gave you responsibilities. Someone prayed for you. Someone cheered you on. And they may not ever know the impact that they had on you, just as you may not realize the impact you are having on others. But it did happen, and now you are here bearing that torch. And it's important to understand this. In every generation from Abraham's to this one, the torch was passed to somebody else. Not a generation was skipped. And that's why we're here. And when we accept that flame, we accept responsibility for passing it on. And I say that not as a burden, but it's out of our desire to please God, to show our love for him and to serve him and demonstrate our love for him by sharing it. And so today we find ourselves here talking about building a legacy. Now, just as Kathy said, I usually think of legacy like when I'm at a funeral and I hear the eulogy, or when somebody's life is coming to an end and people are talking about them. But it's really not relegated to a finite time in life. It's ongoing. And just as our circle of influence changes as people move in and out of our lives, that opportunity for building a legacy into those around us remains the same. Those three words, building a legacy, make a powerful statement. I am building a legacy. You are building a legacy. What I'd like us to do right now is to say that together. So if you can just put emphasis and personalize it. I am building a legacy. So say it with me. I am building a legacy. Let's say it again. I am building a legacy. How does that make you feel? Well, for me, it's like, and maybe you're feeling this way, and you just don't like to speak up in crowds, but I get that. It's a great responsibility, I feel. It's almost like, I don't want to say a burden, but it's a very weighty statement to make. And something maybe you've never thought about before. I think about how significant that is. And then in the next instant, I think, who, me? What do I have to offer? But then I think, okay, it's happening whether I think about it or not. So what do I value? What am I passing on, whether it's a part of my mental thought process or not? Well, I pulled a quote from the Moms Project, which was a, should I try it again? There we go. Maybe it's just because I dropped this, I'll be more careful. From the Moms Project, which is a book that the moms group here was using this past fall. And what it says is that by building family traditions, establishing family values, and giving a voice to your family's missions, you are creating a legacy for your child. So it talks about traditions, values, and your mission. And whether you have children at home, maybe they've already gone, maybe you don't have any children, but we all have that circle of influence. And we all have traditions that we keep, we have values that we hold dear, and we have a mission. And that's how we speak that into the lives of other people and how important that is. In preparation for today, I started to think about who were some of the torch passers in my life. That's kind of a hard thing to say, torch passers, but I know I've had more than one. But that took me to my childhood. And I was trying to think of who the first torch passers were. I was, in today's words, raised in a broken home. My grandmother raised me when I was 2, my sister was 1, and my brother was 3 months old. Our father left us, and I never saw him again. So my mother and my siblings and I moved in with my grandmother. And then when I was 9.5 years old, my mother found out she had cervical cancer, and 10 months later she passed away. So my grandmother raised us, which was a blessing, a great blessing. So needless to say, my grandmother was one of the biggest torch passers in my young life. She was a strong-willed woman of German descent, and for her, we were in church every Sunday morning. It was not a negotiable thing. You had to be pretty sick not to go to church. That was very important to her. And although she didn't talk much about her faith, I always remember seeing her Bible open on her nightstand. Now, because she was older, she didn't like to drive at night, so we were not involved in a lot of extracurricular activities, so youth groups and that kind of thing, but we definitely were in church every single Sunday. I met my husband at church as a teenager, and we have continued to worship and serve at the same church even now. As a young married couple, we became involved in small groups at that time. They were called Sunday school classes. I was a leader of Mother's Club, which is much like your mom's group here, and we were youth coaches. Our children were involved in Sunday school classes and youth groups. They participated for a time in teen choirs, and they got to travel with mission trips. We put Jesus central in our lives, and we desired that our children would have a personal relationship with him as well. We believed then, as we do now, that worship is an integral part of our spiritual walk. It's a part of who we are when we make it a priority and don't want other things in our lives to take over the place that worship has in our lives. And while on vacation, we always find a church that we can go to. And on occasion, sometimes we had church elsewhere. One time in particular, I remember we had our own service on a speedboat where we just dropped anchor in the middle of the lake, which was kind of a neat. We capitalized on that, having a story about Jesus on the Sea of Galilee, so that was kind of a cool opportunity for us. But it was important for us that our children understand that although we were on vacation, we never took a vacation from God. And we still believe that way. But in today's busy world, there are so many things that can become obstacles to being in worship. Our calendars can fill up with so many things that worship can get squeezed out. So we do need to make it a priority. But when there's obstacles, it leads to creativity. And when we can't physically be in the space, we can still worship. The great thing about Crossroads is I know you stream your services, so even when you can't physically be here, you can still be worshiping wherever you are. Or maybe you might find yourself in a boat sometime, out in the middle of the lake worshiping. There's really just no limits to the places that we can worship God. Now for us, most of our close friends were friends from church, so our kids grew up surrounded by people like us who shared our beliefs and loved God above all else. And today, each of our children and their spouses have found a church home, and they are laying a foundation of faith for our grandchildren who I hope pray someday that they will make their own. And it really is such a joy to see our kids and their families worshiping and serving together. Our daughter, Kristen, I'll show you some pictures here. I've kind of missed my slides. That's us in '85. And then this is us in the same place on a vacation this year with all of our kids. Our daughter, Kristen, and her husband, Chris, serve on the strategic planning and leadership teams for their capital campaign at their church, First Lutheran in Over the Rhine. They have about 100 people that attend this church. It faces Washington Park, and it has served their community for 175 years. So they have a rich legacy there. Kristen volunteers in the nursery, and she's also an offering counter, and Chris volunteers to help lead singing on Sunday mornings sometimes, and also as an assistant minister. And Justin, our son, and Cassie, his wife, are members here at Crossroads Mason. They are involved in small groups, couples group, but also Cassie is involved in this group, and Justin is in a man's group one evening a week. And they also serve in Kids Club, and also Cassie is a co-leader of the Moms Group. Most Sundays at the 11:15 service, Justin can be found hanging out with second graders, and Cassie caring for the preschoolers. So if you have ever had kids move through that department, or maybe you volunteer in Kids Club as well, maybe you have met them, run into them. And even our grandchildren have serving hearts. Some of them have been found, have had the opportunity to be on a platform, church platform, singing or leading recitations, and others of them serve regularly in Kids Club. So as you can see, our family does hold church, worshiping and serving as a strong value in our lives. And now, because we don't see our kids all the time and our grandkids all the time, church, worshiping, and serving is a talking point for us when we're with our grandkids, so that we can be an encourager to them and a support to them. And actually, this past Sunday, our granddaughter, Flora, was asked to lead the Lord's Prayer in their worship service. So instead of going to our church, we went to their church, and we got to worship with them and be there to support and encourage her. Prayer has been a part of my daily walk. And we always prayed together, meal times and before bed. But as I've grown older, it's become more conversational and not just for meals and my devotional time. But it's kind of like a continuing conversation I have with God throughout the day. And life experiences have taught me and my family the value and the power of prayer. Almost exactly 8 years ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And it was fast growing, and it was actually the worst type of breast cancer to get. So I not only had to have the lump removed, but I also had to have radiation and chemo. And the instant of return is highest for this type of cancer, but through the treatment I received and the prayers of many people, including many I personally don't know, I'm here 7.5 years after finishing my treatment, feeling very healthy and very blessed. And I would say that that was a time of great spiritual growth for me and for my family. And as I said, prayer is very important to me, and every day I pray for my family by name. When they were young, I asked that each of our children would grow up knowing God and loving His Word, and that one day each one of them would profess their love for Him and choose Him as their Lord and Savior. And while they were still quite young, I prayed for their spouses. I just prayed that if it was God's plan that either or both of them would get married, that little boy and that little girl would grow up in loving and nurturing homes and surroundings where they would know about Jesus, they would study His Word, and that they one day would choose Him as their Lord and Savior. And it was interesting, as they got older and started dating, every time they would bring someone home for me to meet, in the back of my mind I was always thinking, so God, is this who I've been praying for? And as each of the kids moved out, heading off to college, that distance caused me to lean even harder into prayer, because it wasn't a daily thing, and I wasn't actually seeing the relationships develop, and I wasn't meeting everybody that they were in contact with. So I leaned even harder into prayer for them and the relationships that they were developing while I wasn't around to kind of supervise and just have a bird's eye view of what was going on. And it ended up that they each did find wonderful people to marry. And so for each of their wedding days, I wrote a letter, one to Cassie, my daughter-in-law, and one to Chris, my son-in-law, and I gave it to my son and my daughter, and asked them to give it to their new spouses, and it just welcomed them to our family, and told them that I had been praying for them most of their lives. I now have 5 grandchildren, 4 boys, 1 girl. Right now they are 7, 7.5, 8.5, 9.5, and 11. By May, they'll be 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And just as I did with my kids, I am praying for them every day, and I'm already praying for their spouses if it's a part of God's plan that they would marry. Our minister will often say, don't just sit and soak, but go and serve. So Dave and I, my husband and I, have tried to move from the seat to the street, worshiping each week, but also serving, which actually the opportunities for serving has changed over the years. Today, my husband is a storyteller for the elementary kids on Sundays, and he leads some of the strategic planning teams in our church. And I serve on the guest services core team, and also on the creative planning team, which helps to develop our worship services on the weekends. We also co-lead a small group together, and but we believe that serving involves not just our time and our talents, but also our treasures. So it also means giving. Giving has always been important to us as a family, And for me, it began as a child. I remember when we were little, we got a weekly allowance, and my mother gave each of us 3 little jewelry boxes, about the size that you put a pair of earrings in. So we had 3 little boxes. One was labeled church, one was labeled save, and one was labeled spend. And so first we got 3 nickels, and then it was dimes and quarters and on like that. So it was an even split. But I didn't think about it till recently that really was the start for me of learning about tithing and giving back with those 3 little jewelry boxes. And the desire to give has grown as I have moved through life, as we have. And as a young wife and mother, giving began to mean not just our financial resources, but also other things that we have. Hospitality was and continues to be very important to us. It's a part of who we are and how we live life. God told Abraham that he was blessed to be a blessing, and I believe that that's true for us as well. We are blessed beyond measure, and we wanted our children to know that because we are so blessed, we need to share it with others, and we try and help our kids as they instill that in the lives of our grandchildren. We have hosted missionaries, ministers and their families, and friends for as little as one night and for sometimes extended stays. The longest time we ever had anyone stay in our home was for 9 months. And actually, I had my son and daughter fact check my notes, and my original notes said for summer, an entire summer, and my daughter was quick to tell me, Mom, it was not an entire summer, it was a whole school year. And just the way she said it made me realize the impact that it had on her. But we have done that, and we've tried to get our kids involved in the decision of whether we would open our home, to respect them because it was their home too, and to give them a voice on whether we would. So we tried to do that most of the time, but it didn't always happen. One time in particular, we had, I had an afternoon, the kids and I had just arrived home from a week-long exhaustive mission and teen choir trip. And the phone rang, and it was our youth minister, who had also been on that trip with his wife. And they had just picked up their kids and returned home to find that sometime during the week we were gone, their house had flooded. And so they needed a place to stay right away. And I knew we had a large basement, and he knew we had a large basement. And I didn't feel like there was any time to think about it except to say, yes, of course you can come, which I did. And then I told my husband and my kids that Dwight and Stephanie were coming with their 4 kids to stay. So anyway, it was 7.5 weeks. I am so sorry, I did not silence my phone. So for 7.5 weeks, they lived in our basement. And they had a little boy, their youngest was Jesse, he was 2 years old. He liked to wake up early in the morning, and he was in love with our daughter, who was a teenager. And he loved, and remember this is summertime, with a teenager who likes to sleep late. And Jesse would creep up the steps, and he would, before I could see him, every single day, he'd creep down and go down the hallway, and then he'd do the eye peel. I'm sure you've all had it, with the nails in your eyes, to wake her up. That's not pleasant for anybody, but for a teenager, it's awful. And so it was just a very, very challenging, difficult time for Kristen. And and it made me feel awful. Made me feel awful because this was a situation where I hadn't asked their advice, their help in making the decision. So they had no voice in whether they were here. So I felt awful. But in hindsight, Kristen said that even at the time, even though she just wished for her privacy, she knew the value in opening our home to them. She said that she knew that it was good for us, that it not just helped them, but it was good for us, that it made us sacrifice. And she said she came to realize that when you sacrifice, you can find joy in the sacrifice, which I think was pretty cool for a teenager to come to that revelation. So anyway, she ultimately said, I knew it was right for us to care for others, and in this instance, it was good that they were living with us. And the kind of interesting thing for us now is we live downtown, and we have for about 10 years. And so living downtown is very different than in the suburbs because we can walk a lot of places, and we do. There's many days when I'm not even in my car at all. But that also means that when our grandkids come, they're walking with us. And downtown is very different atmosphere because the needy are much more apparent there and visible, but it provides a lot of teachable moments for our grandkids that we can talk about what we're seeing. We can maybe help somebody if we think we can. So there's blessing in being downtown right now and how we're able to share that with our grandkids. We always felt, as I'm sure you all do too, that our children were blessings from God, and we wanted them to know that we loved them unconditionally. And I'm sure you have been in experiences just as we have many times where there were times when we did not agree with the choices that they made or the actions they took, and we wanted to make sure that they knew that we didn't agree with that, but that we did love them. And Justin, as I said, they looked at my nose, and Justin saw that, and he said, just in case anybody knows him, to let you know that I'm talking right now about his sister and not about him. And the funny thing is, my daughter heard him say that, and she said, he's right. So she owns it. So anyway, when they were younger, we often would host parties that, and it was for everybody. We invited our friends and their friends. And sometimes it was for special occasions, and sometimes it was for nothing at all except for the opportunity to get together. But it was fun to get together and just share time together. And now, as our kids are older and they have their own families, we look forward to things like holiday get-togethers and birthdays and big family vacations like that's a picture of. When our children reached middle school age, they had the unique opportunity, along with their cousins, to go in groups of 2 on a special vacation with my husband's parents. They would go on a trip for a week, and it was a special time for those kids to spend with their grandparents. They got to learn about different places and different cultures, and they just were blessed to have the time that they could with their grandparents. And Dave and I hope to do that someday as our grandkids get older. But in the meantime, we have altered that idea a little bit, and we have what we call special time. And what we do is once during the school year and once in the summer, we have each grandchild come one-on-one, one by themselves, to spend time with us. During the school year, we pick them up right after school on Friday, and we bring them home ready for bed on Saturday night. And then in the summer, because there's no schedules, we'll have them for 3 days and 2 nights. And basically, we do what they want to do. And I have done things I never thought I would do. And I have watched movies I never thought I would watch, because I'm not a scary movie person, but some of them are. But we do all kinds of things, and it's just a time to invest in them, spend time with them, and they don't have to compete for attention with their siblings or hear their parents correcting them. And it's amazing how well behaved they are when it's just them. So it's just really a very sweet time that we have with them. Justin and Cassie have taken that idea, and they have made it their own. What they have started doing, Owen, their oldest, turned 10 last year. And so what they have begun to do is when each of the boys turn 10, they take them on a special trip. And Owen, who is this one right here, he loves movies, and he envisions that someday he's going to be the future Steven Spielberg. So he wanted to go to Los Angeles, so that's where they went. And it was just a real special time for him to spend with his mom and dad and not have to share time with his brothers. And the neat thing is that his brothers know that someday their turn's coming when they turn 10. And my daughter actually has talked with their son, Otto, on this end, about when he turns 10, maybe he can go on a special trip, and then Flora will as well. My husband is a very gifted storyteller, and the kids and their friends have always enjoyed hearing Dad's stories. Some are actual situations, and some are complete fabrications, and some are a little bit of both. And typically they have some kind of a learning to them, maybe some kind of scientific learning, maybe there's a moral to the story, maybe there's a spiritual lesson behind it, but anyway, he loves to tell stories, and they love his stories. And again, it's all about spending time together. And some of the stories have actually become classics, being requested many times. It's a part of the ritual. When they were young, our kids were young, that he would tell them stories, and now when we are with the grandkids and it's bedtime, they will not go to bed until Papa has told them a story. And it is not uncommon for me and my daughter-in-law or my daughter to hear from the bedroom a request. Papa, tell us about the time Mama killed the ducks. Or tell us about when you threw up in the helicopter. Those are both actual instances. They aren't fabrications. My daughter has expanded on this idea, and what she does is she asks each of the kids to tell her to choose 2 words, any words. And then she, on the fly, has to come up with a story that uses all those words, which can be quite interesting based on the words that I know that they throw out to her. And then Justin and Cassie have taken that and made it their own. They do the sentence story, where one of the kids will say a sentence, and then they go around and everybody says a sentence, weaving a story as they go. So it has to make some sense. It can't be just ridiculous statements. And then Justin also likes to tell the movie stories. Movies that they probably haven't seen because of the rating, so he'll tell them the storyline, and it's a new story for them, and bottom line is just time spent together, sweet time to be together. Now, I like to read, and so I would make a point of reading to our kids, even after they could read on their own. And I can remember spending time reading the Chronicles of Narnia to the kids while they would eat their breakfast before they headed off to school. And for probably 3 or 4 years, around Christmas time, I would read the best Christmas pageant ever. So we had those types of traditions. And my daughter actually said that last year she started the tradition of reading the best Christmas pageant ever to her kids. And she said they started requesting it again this year by November, so I think they'll be doing that for a while. And all of our grandchildren are old enough to read on their own, but still it is great joy to sit and share a book with them and read. Sometimes we'll take turns. I read a page, then they read a page, back and forth that way. We strived to make our home a welcome and safe place for our kids to bring their friends. And our son, Justin, and his friends had a great time coming to our house. They might be outside shooting baskets, or maybe they'd be in the basement playing ping pong or watching some kind of sports or whatever boys do. And all it would take is for my husband to call down the steps and say, anybody want to see the Shake Lady? And there would literally be a stampede up my steps. And before I knew it, our white van would be headed out of our driveway, and they would be headed to United Dairy Farmer. So, and the boys still talk about the Shake Lady, because there was always this one lady that worked there that they would go see. Now, Kristen and her friends were more reclusive, and they chose to sit in her room and giggle and talk till all hours of the night. But I remember one time when Kristen and her friend Christy called me back to her room. The door was shut. I went in. They asked me to shut the door, asked me to sit down on the floor with them, and they said they had a question for me. And their question, what do I think it means when the Bible says wives submit to your husbands? Now, this was the 90s, and women were starting to be very vocal about their rights. They were standing up for equality, and so this was really a loaded question, and it led to quite an interesting conversation. And Christy, I saw her friend recently, and she's talking about that talk, which happened like however long ago that was, 25 years ago. As I reflected on what to share today, I kept going back to my favorite verses in the Bible. They have become what I would call my life verse, and what I try to live my life by. And they talk about your thought life, and it's Philippians 4:4-8. Rejoice in the Lord always. I'll say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but through prayer with supplication and thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God that surpasses all comprehension will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there is anything excellent or worthy of praise, let your mind dwell on these things. I committed these words to memory a long, long time ago, and I say them often, sometimes multiple times in a day, or maybe I might just say a small section of it because I need to hear that reminder. And although I fail to heed them often, they have helped to shape me into the woman I am today and influenced my thoughts, my words, and my actions. And as a result, the legacy that I'm leaving. Everybody leaves a legacy whether they plan to or not. And in preparing to be with you today, I have thought back over my life, how I tried to pour into the lives of my family and those around me. My focus was to equip our children and their friends, those we did life with, to be strong, upstanding citizens who love God above all else and want to serve Him. And maybe you're like me. I never thought of it as building a legacy. So maybe our conversation today has brought a new perspective to you in how you view your life, that how you live your life every day, the values you hold dear, is building a legacy. You're not just molding future citizens who love the Lord or just influencing the adults around you to be better people and serve God. As you share God's love with others, however you do that, you are impacting future generations. It's kind of like a ripple effect, like we talked about before, as it ripples from one generation to the next. God only knows the plans he has for you, for your children, for your children's children. Everybody leaves a legacy whether they plan to or not. And everything we say or do leaves an imprint of our lives on those around us. Just think about the people you do life with. Family, friends, your neighbors, maybe your paperboy, your mailman, your workout buddy, your small group, the people you serve with, the ladies that surround you now in this room. I know I am blessed with many people in my life. And as long as there is breath in my body, there's an opportunity to leave a rich legacy of hope. And so it is for you.
Thank you so much, Linda. That was amazing. Now I know why you had such glowing responses. Oh, okay.
I thought it was me at first.
Okay. Hello? So thank you so much. There's so many amazing nuggets and all that, and you've done a great job with your kids. Now I even feel worse. No, not at all. That was beautiful. I think we can all walk away with some ideas from that. And actually, I feel like we all have different types of legacy in our lives. Like yours was a lot of service, and some people are educational and just listening to people. And we all have different ways of loving Jesus, and we're all called to it in different ways. So I think some people are, very upfront in the forefront with their serving, and some people are more behind the scenes. But however you are in your life, it's important to share it. And sometimes, I don't know, I think I wish I had a do-over. I wish I had my kids more involved in all my service. Because the moments that they remember are the moments that we were serving together. I mean, those are the best moments we have. So anyways, I think we all have a second chance with our grandkids, and we can always include our kids day to day. But, and the other thing is I think that is closing the loop. We all want to be known as good people and good grandmas, good mothers, but really the reason why we do what we do is because of Jesus' example in the Bible. We do it because we're not good people, we're godly people. So let us pray as we're about to leave. Jesus, thank you.